Somewhere between 10 million and 300,000 years ago, one of your ancestors ate a piece of fruit that had been sitting on the ground for too long. They didn't plan it, they were just hungry. The fruit smelled a little off, tasted a little sharp, but food was food, and you didn't ask questions. And then, something happened. The tension in their body loosened. The constant low-level fear that came with being alive in that world went quiet for a minute. They didn't have a word for what just happened. They just knew they wanted it again. That's where this starts. Not with a brewery, not with a recipe, with one confused primate sitting on a forest floor feeling, for the first time in their life, slightly okay. In 2014, a biologist at UC Berkeley named Robert Dudley published a book called The Drunken Monkey. His argument was simple. When fruit falls from a tree and sits on the ground, the natural sugars start breaking down. Yeast gets in, fermentation begins, and the fruit produces small amounts of ethanol. When our ancestors ate that fruit, something happened in their brain. They didn't know why, but they kept coming back. Over millions of years, Dudley argues, our ancestors didn't just tolerate alcohol. They evolved to seek it out. The body learned to process it. The brain learned to like it. By the time anatomically modern humans showed up, the preference was already written in, long before anyone figured out how to make it on purpose. Which raises the obvious question. When did they figure that out? The answer came from a cave. In 2018, archaeologists excavating a site near Haifa, Palestine, a cave called Rakefet, used by a group called the Natufians about 13,000 years ago, found stone mortars carved directly into the bedrock. When they analyzed the residue inside, they found traces of wheat and barley that had been soaked, germinated, and left to ferment. Beer, brewed in a cave 13,000 years ago. The Natufians were not farmers. They hadn't invented agriculture yet. They were still collecting wild grain by hand and hunting animals for meat. They didn't grow the barley. They found it in the wild. But making something fermented from it was important enough that they figured that out before almost everything else. Before pottery, before writing, before permanent houses. First things first. The old story goes like this. Humans settled down, started farming, built villages, and eventually discovered fermentation. Alcohol came after civilization. Rakefet Cave says the opposite, and they weren't the only ones. About 1,000 years later, someone in southeastern Turkey built something that still doesn't fully make sense. A site called Göbekli Tepe. Massive stone pillars, some weighing over 10 tons, arranged in careful circles and carved with animals. The whole structure was deliberate, complex, and built by hunter-gatherers. People with no permanent homes, no pottery, no farming. For years, archaeologists couldn't explain it. What motivates nomadic people to organize the labor needed to move 10-ton stones up a hill and carve them with precision? What are they doing here? Then they found large stone vats at the site, chemical traces of fermented grain inside, enough for large gatherings. Archaeologists describe Gobekli Tepe as a gathering place for ritual and feasting, which is an academic way of saying this is where people came to party. They built one of the oldest structures in human history so they'd have somewhere to drink together. And honestly, if you've ever helped a friend move furniture for a promise of beer afterward, you already understand the basic logic. A botanist named Patrick McGovern has spent decades studying ancient alcohol. He argues that humans didn't start farming to make bread. They started farming to make beer. Bread requires grinding, kneading, baking, a lot of steps. Beer is simpler. You soak grain in water, leave it alone, and fermentation does the rest by itself. And the desire to feel what fermented fruit does to you is a stronger motivator than wanting grain in a slightly different shape. If he's right, then the reason we settled down, the reason we built farms, then villages, then cities, then everything else, starts with a craving that was already 10 million years old. By 7000 BCE, the evidence gets specific. In a Neolithic village called Jiahu in central China, archaeologists found pottery jars with residue from a fermented drink made of rice, honey, grapes, and hawthorn berries. The oldest confirmed recipe for alcohol in the world. And it wasn't crude. It was a blend. Multiple ingredients, deliberately chosen and combined. Whoever made this knew exactly what they were doing. They also, presumably, had a very good evening. And then there's the hangover. Nobody talks about this part. But the first person to wake up with a hangover had absolutely no idea what was happening to them. No word for it, no Advil, no Gatorade, no friend texting, "You good?" No explanation whatsoever. Just confusion, a splitting headache, extreme regret, and the vague memory of something that felt genuinely great the night before. And they still went back. That's how good it felt. By the time ancient Egypt came around, beer wasn't something people made occasionally. It was threaded through everything. Workers who built the pyramids were paid in beer, 4 to 5 liters a day. Not coins, not grain, beer. And this still, in 2026, sounds like a reasonable compensation package to a significant portion of the population. It also made practical sense. The water from the Nile was often contaminated and unsafe to drink straight. Beer, because of the brewing process, was cleaner. It kept people alive in a way the river couldn't. The brewing process also added calories and nutrients. For a laborer dragging limestone blocks in the desert heat, that mattered. Beer wasn't a treat. It was infrastructure. The Egyptians believed beer was created by Osiris and given to humans as a gift. It appeared in temple offerings, burial rituals, and medical prescriptions. Doctors mixed herbs into it and prescribed it for stomach pain, infections, wound care. One drink was doing the job of a paycheck, a water filter, a meal, a medicine, and a prayer, all from the same cup, which, to be fair, is a lot to ask of any beverage. But beer has always delivered. Here's the part that gets me. The earliest writing we have, not stories, not laws, not poetry, is beer recipes and accounting lists for beer distribution. The first thing humans decided was important enough to write down was how to make this and who was getting how much of it, which tells you everything about what actually mattered. Beer is 13,000 years old. Refrigerators are about 100 years old. That means 12,900 years of warm beer. And people still showed up. So here's the full picture. 10 million years ago, your ancestors were drawn to fermented fruit they found by accident. 13,000 years ago, they were deliberately brewing in caves before they knew how to farm. 12,000 years ago, they were possibly building the first monuments in human history just to have a place to drink together. 9,000 years ago, they had recipes. 5,000 years ago, entire civilizations were running on it. The first person who felt what alcohol did to them was sitting in a world with no comfort in it. No soft surfaces, no quiet, no relief from anything. And for a few hours, this gave them something that felt like all three. That feeling was worth 13,000 years of deliberate effort, worth building monuments, worth inventing agriculture, worth writing down. The process got more sophisticated. The ingredients got better. The cups got fancier. But it's the same impulse, the same one that made a small primate reach for a piece of overripe fruit on a forest floor millions of years ago. We just learned how to make it on purpose. And we never really stopped.